Hey, my fellow listeners. We know you guys love these creepy stories, yet most of you aren't subscribing. Please hit that sub button and join the family. Hit the bell icon so you never miss another video. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. It all started with a job, a lucky break I thought at the time. A position for airport operations support way out in the Alaska interior. The pay was too good for the title. The benefits were solid, and they were desperate for someone to start immediately. My interview was a blurry video call with a man named Carl, whose face was pixelated and voice lagged. He asked mostly about my tolerance for isolation in the cold. He didn't seem to care about my resume. He just said the job was about vigilance and following procedures to the letter. I figured all airport jobs were like that, just with more mundane rules about baggage carts and runway lights. I was wrong. The first hint should have been the contract. It was thick, stuffed with addendums and non-disclosure agreements that threatened legal action so severe it felt like a joke. I signed it all. I needed the money and the escape. The flight north was the last normal plane ride I would ever have. Looking down at the endless sprawl of white and green and jagged gray mountains, I felt a thrill. A sense of finally being somewhere that mattered. The airport itself was a shock. It was smaller than I imagined. A low-slung building of weathered wood and steel that looked more like a large hunting lodge than a transportation hub. It was perched on the edge of nowhere, with the airstrips carved out of the stubborn wilderness. The terminal inside was quiet. Too quiet for a place that supposedly saw regular cargo runs and the occasional hardy tourist. The other staff moved with a quiet, efficient purpose, their eyes never lingering too long on anything, especially not the windows after dark. Carl was the operations manager, a man in his 50s with a permanent tiredness etched around his eyes. He gave me the tour, his voice a low monotone. He showed me the check-in counters, the baggage handling, the de-icing equipment, and then he handed me the manual. It was a simple binder, but it felt heavy. "This is your Bible," he said. "You do not deviate, not even a little, you understand." I nodded, thinking it was just corporate paranoia. I waited until I was in my small Spartan room in the staff quarters to open it. The first few pages were standard stuff, safety protocols, radio procedures. Then I got to the real rules. They were typed in a plain font, each one more bizarre than the last. Rule number 1. The perimeter fence must be visually inspected every 2 hours, precisely on the hour. The log must be filled out with a green pen. Only a green pen. If you find a blue pen at the station, do not use it, break it, and report it immediately. I chuckled, thinking it was some weird inventory control thing. Rule number 7. Between the hours of 3:00 a.m. and 3:17 a.m., all exterior lights on the north side of the terminal must be switched off. No exceptions. This is a critical power-saving measure. It seemed like an oddly specific time for saving power. Rule number 12. If you observe a lone figure standing on the tarmac during a snowstorm, do not attempt to make radio contact. Instead, turn off all communications in your vicinity and wait exactly 17 minutes before resuming normal operations. The figure is not real. It is a weather-induced mirage. My smile faded. Rule 18. The nightly supply flight, designation Polar Bear 6, always lands at 1:45 a.m. Its crew never disembarks. You are to fuel the aircraft as per the automated request form. You do not approach the aircraft. You do not make eye contact with anyone in the cockpit. If a crew member attempts to signal you, look at your feet until they stop. I read through dozens of these, each one layering a new kind of unease. A cold knot tightening in my stomach. This wasn't a joke. The sheer specificity was terrifying. Carl had said deviation wasn't an option, and the look in his eyes now made sense. It was fear. My first night alone on the shift was the real beginning. The skeleton crew of 2 others vanished to their posts, and I was left in the main operations office, a room full of humming servers and radar screens showing empty skies. The silence was a physical presence, broken only by the constant moan of the wind outside. I did my first perimeter check at 10:00 p.m. The green pen felt silly in my hand. The floodlights cast long, dancing shadows from the gnarled trees that pressed in against the fence. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, and every crunch of my boots on the hard-packed snow sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. I saw nothing, just the endless dark and the fence. I logged it with a green pen, my hand trembling not from the cold, but from the tension. The hours crawled by. I jumped at every creak and groan of the old building. By 2:30 a.m., I was a wreck, my nerves frayed. The rule about the 3 o'clock a.m. lights was looming in my mind. Why that specific 17-minute window? What could possibly happen? At 2:55, I made my way to the north side light control panel. A metal box on the wall near a row of windows that looked out onto the darkest part of the landscape. My finger hovered over the switch. The clock on the wall ticked with agonizing slowness. When it hit 3 o'clock, I flipped the master switch for the north lights. The world outside the windows vanished, swallowed by an absolute, profound blackness. It was like looking into a void. I stood there, my face close to the glass, trying to see anything. At first, there was nothing, just the hammering of my own heart. Then, I saw it, a shape. It was difficult to make out, not a figure, but something lower to the ground, moving with a slow, deliberate gait that was wrong. It didn't walk so much as shift, a hulking shadow darker than the surrounding night. It moved parallel to the fence, and as it passed, a sound seeped through the thick glass, a low, wet, clicking noise, like stones being knocked together deep underwater. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The thing, whatever it was, stopped and seemed to turn towards the window, towards me. I felt a pressure, a weight of attention that made my skin crawl. I stumbled back from the window, fumbling for the light switch, my eyes glued to the clock. The 17 minutes felt like 17 hours. When the final second ticked over, I slammed the lights back on, flooding the tarmac with a harsh white glow. There was nothing there, no tracks in the fresh snow, nothing, just the empty expanse leading to the tree line. I spent the rest of my shift in a cold sweat, jumping at every noise. The rules weren't just stupid guidelines, they were protections. The next day, I tried to casually ask Carl about the north lights, about what I might have seen. His face went stony. He cut me off before I could finish. "You saw a trick of the dark," he said, his voice low and firm. "You followed the rule. That's all that matters. Do not think about it. Do not talk about it. Just follow the rule." His reaction confirmed everything. I was trapped in a nightmare with a paycheck. The weeks blurred into a monotony of dread. I followed the rules with a religious fervor. The green pen, the radio silence during snowstorms. I even saw the lone figure once, a tall, indistinct shape standing motionless in the swirling snow. I turned off my radio, as instructed, and watched the clock. After 17 minutes, it was gone. No footprints. The most unsettling was the polar bear's sixth flight. It always landed at exactly 1:45 a.m. A old, unmarked cargo plane with engines that sounded sick. It would taxi to the most remote pad, and I would fuel it from the truck. The windows of the cockpit were tinted almost black, but sometimes I could feel eyes on me. I never looked. I kept my gaze down. As per Rule 18, one night, as I was finishing the fueling, I saw a flicker of movement from one of the small cabin windows, a pale hand, pressed against the glass. The fingers were too long, the joints seeming to bend in places they shouldn't. I immediately dropped my gaze to my boots and stood there, rigid, until I heard the hydraulic whine of the fuel hose disconnecting. I risked a glance as I drove away. The hand was gone. I never saw it again. But the image was burned into my mind. The strangeness became my normal. The constant background hum of fear. I stopped questioning. I just obeyed. That was my mistake, becoming complacent. It happened on a long, quiet night. I was doing my perimeter check, the green pen tucked in my pocket. The wind was howling, whipping snow into my face. I was halfway around the fence line when I saw it. A small, dark lump lying in the snow just inside the fence. I approached cautiously. It was a backpack, a modern, brightly colored one. Totally out of place, it was unzipped, and inside were a few notebooks and a cheap ballpoint pen. A blue ballpoint pen. My blood ran cold. Rule number 1 flashed in my mind. If you find a blue pen, do not use it, break it, and report it immediately. But report it to who? Carl was asleep, and the rule didn't specify. That initial defiance, that little spark of human rebellion against the inexplicable, felt so justified in the moment. It was just a pen. A cheap, mass-produced piece of plastic and ink. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't cursed. It was a pen. And my rational mind, the part that had been slowly eroded by months of bizarre protocols, screamed that this was finally proof it was all in my head. A collective psychosis shared by a handful of isolated men in the frozen wastes. I told myself I was reclaiming my sanity by pocketing the thing, by not snapping it in two like some superstitious fool. The act of zipping it into my pocket alongside the sanctioned green one felt like a victory. A tiny stand for normalcy. The backpack itself was mundane, filled with the sad detritus of a traveler who didn't belong here. A paperback novel with a bent cover, a half-eaten bag of trail mix, a fleece jacket smelling faintly of detergent and pine. It was so ordinary it was painful, a stark reminder of a world where the biggest worries were missed flights and lost luggage, not creatures that walked through walls. Tossing it into the lost and found closet felt like closing a book on a minor incident. I remember dust motes dancing in the air as I swung the door shut, and for a few hours I felt good. I felt clever. I had confronted the absurdity and won. But the unease started as a whisper, a subtle wrongness that insinuated itself into the fabric of my reality. The feeling of being watched was the first thing. It had always been there. A background radiation of paranoia in this place, but now it intensified. It became a focused pressure, like multiple points of attention were now fixed on me specifically. As I walked the long, linoleum-floored corridors, the shadows in the recessed doorways seemed to have weight and depth. They felt less like an absence of light and more like a presence. A thick, black liquid that clung to the corners. If I stared at them for too long, I could almost perceive a slow, viscous movement within the darkness, a coalescing and dissolving of form that stopped the moment I focused directly on it. The constant, droning hum of the server racks in the operations room. A sound I had long since tuned out, changed. Underneath the steady electrical tone, a new layer emerged, a faint, discordant static that would sometimes resolve into a pattern. It was the auditory equivalent of seeing something from the corner of your eye. It sounded almost like whispers, not in any language I could recognize, but with a cadence that suggested intelligence, a sibilant, clicking conversation happening just beneath the surface of reality. I would spin around in my chair, convinced someone was behind me, only to find the room empty. The silence that followed felt heavy and accusatory. Then came the visual ghosts, the skittering movements. They were fast, impossibly so, a flicker of distorted shadow that would dart from behind a baggage cart or zip across the ceiling tiles. When I turned my head, there was never anything there. No physical evidence, just the lingering impression of something that moved in a way that defied physics, with too many joints, with a speed that wasn't natural. I tried so hard to blame myself, to cling to the crumbling ledge of rationality. I told myself it was sleep deprivation, the effect of the endless twilight in summer, or the profound darkness in winter, the isolation playing tricks on my mind. I started drinking more coffee. I tried to force myself to sleep at regular intervals, but the rationalizations were becoming thin, transparent lies I told myself to keep from screaming, because deep down, in a part of my brain that was older and wiser than my conscious thoughts, I knew. The knowledge was a cold, hard stone in my gut. It was the pen. I had broken a fundamental rule. I had introduced a foreign object, a wrong object, into this carefully balanced, fragile ecosystem. And then it appeared, a new contact. It didn't fade in from the distance. It just manifested, a solid blip already moving at an incredible speed from the deep north. From the absolute nowhere on our maps, my training kicked in, a hollow echo of normalcy. I reached for the radio, my voice sounding small and pathetic in the large room. Unidentified aircraft north of my position. This is Alaska Interior Airport. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. The only response was a wave of static that crackled from the speaker, but it wasn't random static. It was that same discordant pattern from the server hum. A series of wet, percussive clicks that made my skin crawl. The blip didn't deviate, it shot straight towards us, and as it passed directly overhead, the world broke. Every light in the terminal died at once. Not a flicker, but a sudden, absolute extinction. The screens went black, the hum of the servers cut out, leaving a silence so profound it felt like a physical blow. Then, with a dull thud, the emergency lights activated, bathing everything in a bloody, dim crimson glow. And in that hellish light, I saw them. The things from outside were now inside. They were here, in the terminal. They were tall, impossibly so, their bodies composed of a darkness that seemed to drink the red light. Their limbs were elongated and articulated all wrong, bending in the middle like an insect's, or having too many segments. They moved not by walking, but by a shifting, gliding motion, as if they were sliding through the air rather than touching the floor. They weren't fully solid. I could see the faint outline of a row of chairs through one of them as it passed. They were like shadows given a terrible dimension, and they slipped through solid walls. Now it was everywhere, echoing off the high ceiling of the departure lounge, a cacophony of ancient, meaningless communication that drilled directly into the primal part of my brain. I didn't think. I dropped to the floor and scrambled under the heavy metal desk. Pulling my knees to my chest, I clamped my hands over my mouth to stop the whimpering sounds trying to escape. I could hear them moving, a soft, shifting sound like sand flowing over glass. They weren't rampaging. They weren't tearing the place apart looking for something. They were just there, existing, exploring. Their movement was purposeless and meandering, yet filled with a dreadful intent I couldn't comprehend. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I had to look, I had to know. I peered out from under the desk. Through the forest of chair legs, one of them was moving down the corridor outside the ops room, its form flowing like oil. It paused right at the doorway, and its head, that shapeless darkness, turned slowly, deliberately, towards me. I felt its gaze. It wasn't a look of malice or hunger. It was something worse. A cold, ancient, utterly alien curiosity. It was the way a scientist might look at a unique insect, with a detached, analytical interest. It saw me, huddled under the desk, a terrified animal in its cage, and it simply noted my existence before shifting its form and gliding away, down the hall. The 17 minutes that followed were an eternity. I counted each second, my breath hitching in my chest. The clicking sound slowly receded. The feeling of oppressive presence began to lift, and then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The lights sputtered back on. The servers whirred to life. The radar screen lit up, clear and empty. I stayed under that desk for a long time. Maybe another hour, my body trembling uncontrollably. When I finally crawled out, everything looked normal. The chairs were upright. The computers were on. There was no sign of a struggle, no slime, no footprints, nothing. But something was different. The very air felt used, contaminated. It was thicker, harder to breathe, and it carried a faint, metallic scent, like ozone and old blood. That was when the last of my denial shattered. I didn't think, I just moved. A frantic, panic-driven need to correct my mistake. I stumbled to the lost and found, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the knob. I grabbed the backpack, the cheap fabric now feeling sinister in my grasp. And then I dug into my pocket, my fingers closing around the cool, smooth cylinder of blue pen. I didn't break it. The thought never even occurred to me. I was too terrified of it, of what it represented, of what it could do. I ran, my boots pounding on the linoleum, out through a side door and into the biting cold. I didn't stop until I reached a perimeter fence. At the spot where I had first found the bag, with a desperate, grunting effort, I hurled the backpack and the pen together, as far as I could into the oppressive darkness of the woods. I watched them vanish into the tangled undergrowth, and I felt an immediate, slight lessening of the pressure, like a fever breaking. I never told Carl. What would I say? That I brought a curse into the airport because I didn't like the color of a pen. He would have fired me on the spot, or worse, looked at me with that same knowing fear and sent me away. And where would I go? This job was my life now. There was no going back to a normal world after this. Things have settled down since that night. The intense phenomena have mostly stopped. The skittering sounds are rare. The shadows usually stay in their places. The discordant whisper in the servers is gone. But it's not the same as before. The silence feels fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over a deep, dark lake, and sometimes, during the mandatory 3 o'clock a.m. blackout. When I stand in the darkness and look out at the void, I see them, more than before, their dark, shifting forms clustered together out there in the night. And they aren't wandering aimlessly. They seem to be gathered, lingering near the exact spot where I threw the backpack and the pen into the woods, waiting. I still have my job. I still follow every rule, not out of duty, but out of a raw, bleeding terror. I don't know what this place truly is, if the airport was built on some kind of thin spot, a weak place in the world, or if we are just a convenient landmark, a bus stop for things that travel in the silent, dark spaces between the stars. I don't know what the polar bear 6 carries in its dark hold, or what kind of things its crew are. And I have no desire to ever find out. The rules are not suggestions. They are not for efficiency or profit. They are the bars on a cage, meticulously designed to keep what is outside from coming in. And I learned, in the most visceral way possible, that you never, ever, open the door, not even a crack, not even for a second, not even for something as seemingly insignificant as a stupid blue pen.